So I want you to take a minute again with your Post-its and your Sharpies and just think about these four story types. And of the four story types, what resonates with you the most? And are there any stories that immediately come to mind from the last, say, 2 or 3 weeks? That as I was talking, you were thinking, oh, yeah, I can think of this inside out story. And I need to make sure, that we share that. So I want to give you a minute or two. If there are any that come to mind that are somewhat brief that you're interested in sharing in the chat, I want to invite you to do that as well. But mostly this is just a quick reflection time so you don't lose maybe some of the things that were coming to mind for the last few minutes. Okay, hopefully you've had a minute. If you need to keep writing, feel free. But I have another set of questions for you. So I want you to think for a minute about the most commonly told story in your organization. And this might be in your whole company, or if you're in a really big company, it could just be in your, in your department. But what is the most commonly told story in your organization? And what does that story tell you and others about your culture? I want you to think back to the pyramid and the idea that, about beliefs and experiences. So what is the most commonly told story and what does that tell you about your culture? And before you start writing that, I just want to mention that what's important about this is that until you give people a new story to tell, they will continue telling the same story over and over again. And so it's really important to understand what's the what's a commonly told story right now, and if that doesn't reflect what you think the reality is right now, then it may be time to tell some new stories. So I want you to think about that for a minute, give you a couple more minutes. What's the most commonly told story, and what does that tell you about your culture? if you're having a hard time pinpointing the most commonly told story, one way to think about it is what's the story that is definitely going to be told to the new person who walks in the door. All right, so the follow on to that one, now that you've thought about the most commonly told story and decided whether or not that's one that should continue to be told, there are likely some opportunities to tell a new story, particularly in your agile transformation. As you think about the 4 different types of stories, as you think about, the stories that are being told now, hopefully already you've started to think like, oh, we could be telling this story instead of that story. That story is from 2 years ago, and that's not how we operate anymore. And so, as you think about these opportunities, it's important to be really intentional about creating a platform or a channel for telling those stories. So I mentioned the company where we had a storytelling channel in Slack. It might be that, or it might be, you have an all hands and you could carve out a certain amount of time, or maybe it's just in a team. Like maybe in your retrospectives, you carve out 10 minutes to tell some stories. Everyone's context is different, but I want you to think for a couple of minutes about what are some channels that already exist that you could use for you to tell new stories or to encourage other people to tell new stories, or maybe you need to create some new channels for that. So just a couple more minutes to think about that, reflect on that for a moment.